morning, everyone, and welcome to the PivotBoss pre-market video for Friday, October 24th, 2025. I am Frank Ochoa, aka PivotBoss. Happy Friday, everyone. Here's a look at the ES in the daily time frame here. The ES currently up in overnight and pre-market trading here, just trading a range of 20% of average. Again, that's been kind of a constant this week. Early compression followed by later day volatility. This was the only day here, Tuesday, that really finished with a low range day, but everything else started low range, ended up a bit higher range, anywhere between 80 and 100 points. This one right here was 68, this one right here was 98, back here that was 89. Those have been the big days of the week here so far. Right now, one thing to keep an eye on, we have CPI data coming out here during the pre-market, and that CPI data would normally give us really good volatility that day. This is at least a little bit delayed here for September, so again, this might be a little more dulled than usual. But one thing we are looking for is if we do get a little bit increased volatility, which way do we go early? Those multiple day highs right there, keep an eye on those highs. If we get a rejection up here and we start to fall back below the previous session's highs or 2 or 3 day highs here, that could lead to a thrust reversal opportunity back into the previous session's midpoint. So there could be a trap here around 6,800 that leads us back into the previous day's mid. Previous day's mid right there is 6,750. That'd be about a 50-point move from extreme to extreme. So we're looking for at least 50 to 60 points of range today. Now, one thing to keep in mind, intraday, the intraday VWAP, very bullish right now. Very bullish. So from an intraday perspective, pullbacks to VWAP could be bid until a rejection occurs and until VWAP is taken offered. So keep an eye on intraday VWAP. Keep an eye on the previous session's high here for any signs of rejection. One last level here. That Friday high right there. That Friday high is 68.06 half. That is your key range high from that Friday. You drop to this low. We've been inside that Friday range ever since now. 2 weeks solid. Do we get into that edge and do we fall back into the range below once we get there? So we may still have a little bit more upside here before we find rejection. But if we do see rejection here at this upper end today, there could be a thrust back into the week's range below. All right, looking at the NQ. Similar analysis here for the NQ, only this one has already hit that key range high right there. That's your Friday high. That's 25,388. And price got that level here already just a couple hours ago, pulling back off that zone right now. Keep an eye on the previous session's high. Again, any failure to hold that level could open up a return back into the previous session's midpoint, the rising 8 period, as the range has been here for the week. That's been the range for the week. If we fail at the edge of that range, you fall into the range below. So again, keeping an eye on that edge right there. Now, if we are to push through these highs, that could open up some clear air above at some point. Is it today? Is it next week? Again, we'll see what CPI data brings here in a little while. That could provide some volatility at this edge. Does it lead to expansion, or do we start to see a little bit of a reaction that brings us back into the range below? All right, looking at crude oil. This one remains bullish here. Big time continuation over the last couple of days. You've seen this thing push back above the $60 level in 61.45. 61.45 is the previous quarter's low here. We've recovered it as of yesterday. Today drops into the level, defends, and bounces again. This has been as good a 5-day rally as we've seen. But even the best 5-day rallies here in the recent market, call it the last 6 months, have been crushed back to the downside. Now in this case, headline risk could be driving this thing higher, and the recovery of that 61.45 points to 66 up above. That's the 61 half to 62 zone, 68 zone. That area right there. To recover that lower edge opens the door to that 66. You also have a falling 200-day moving average, a falling yearly VWAP that goes right into that zone. That could be a magnet for crude oil up ahead. And again, even if we were to hit that level after a tremendous rally of say 10 points at that point, given the seasonal bearishness of this market, we may see it turn right back down off that zone. But right now, things are pointing up at the moment. Cautiously bullish. As this thing continues higher, the next pullback could get us into 66 above. All right, let's take a look now at gold futures. Here's a look at gold. A little bit of a pullback here heading into the RTH open, down 1.66% right now heading into the RTH trade. Still holding that low from a couple of days ago. The thought was we could get to the midpoint of this range, which I misquoted yesterday. It's 42.0960. 42.0960 right here. Coco to the trading dog saying hello. 42.0960 right here is the midpoint to get to if we're going to create that new key range here off that impulse sell-off right there. So again, right now, looking to see if we can make a move into that midpoint before we get a new low. If we're pushing to a new low here, this is going to open up quite a bit of a push or continuation downward. If this thing's going to try and maintain this acceptance at these levels, then you'd like to see that 42.0960 hit at some point here. So keep an eye on the previous session's low right now. There's a bit of a lower low that's developed here on the intraday chart. Very clear intraday downward slope to VWAP right now. But that lower low at this edge could provide an opportunity to fade it back to intraday VWAP and perhaps back across the range as it holds in a 2-day range. So failed new low right now could be developing for a short-term rotation, but it could develop into a move that pushes things back into that 42.0960. All right, let's take a look here at the YM. Looking at the YM, this one is a little different than the ES and NQ, as those are on highs. This one is down, testing the previous session's high, but in a downward move over the last couple of days. That could lead to a trap, especially off the 47K level. 47K very important here. You can see how this market has responded to 47K over the last several weeks. If there's a failure to hold prices here and we drop back below the previous session's high, that opens up a return back to the midpoint and perhaps across the range. In the bearish scenario, we could go outside day down. However, we'll see how this thing plays out here today as we stay mostly within the range to finish the week in all likelihood. But keeping an eye on that previous session's high. Does it lead to expansion up to 47.2? Or do we fail back below and drop into 46.8 and a bit lower? Keeping an eye on that level. Now, Bitcoin up 0.8% heading into the RTH open right here. This thing's barely hanging on to the midpoint of that day one quote-unquote rejection day. Not the strongest, but it happened in the zone that you want it to happen at. Barely hanging on to that midpoint. Now, typically speaking, after you get a day one rejection, you want it to hold that mid before continuing higher. Once you get into about days 3 and 4 of holding the mid barely, there's some risk here at failing through the mid and watching any early longs here release their positions here. So again, there could be a bit of a stop run down, could be a long liquidation if we bust through that level. So keep an eye on that zone right there. That's going to be right around the 106,700 zone, right in that area. To fall through that area would be significant. As of right now, barely hanging on. And again, can we bounce and go get a return back up toward the 117 zone, 118? That could provide a very nice return back up into the center meaty part of this range. But if we're failing here, big time continuation down, and that could lead all boats downward as well. Looking at ETH, this one's up 2.25%. Now this one has a midpoint here on a quote-unquote day one rejection day. Again, not the strongest rejection day. It just turned in the spot where we would want it to turn. You know, the extension here on the 25% extension inside the buy zone here below the quarterly low or the monthly low and quarterly low in that zone. So again, some big time areas right here, but kind of a wimpy bounce out of that zone as of right now. Can we bounce it back up toward 4,300? Or do we start to fail down through 3,700? 3,700, 3,750 is going to be a big zone. If we're failing through 3,700, 2,800 and as low as 2,150 could be ahead. So big time zone here to hold for ETH. All right, that is it for now. We'll see how this plays out here heading into the weekend. Happy Friday. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you in the trading room. Take care.